Why do we believe that all human beings are equal? Because if you really think about it, nothing about us is equal. We differ in height, weight, skin color, nationality, intelligence, education, almost everything. And yet we insist that every human being has the same rights and dignity. And so where did that idea come from? That's what we are going to explore today. In 1857, a man named Dred Scott, an enslaved man, stood before the highest court in the United States, and he asked for one thing, his freedom, and the court denied him. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney ruled that black people had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. And he went further. He declared that enslaved people were not citizens and could never become citizens. Imagine hearing that, being told by the highest authority in the land that you had no rights at all. Today we look back at that decision with horror. We recognize it not just as bad law, but evil. But here's the deeper question. How do we know it was wrong? Not just unpopular, but objectively wrong. What makes something morally wrong for all people at all times? Let's imagine for a moment that there is no God. And suppose everything about us, our bodies, our minds, and even our sense of morality is the result of random evolution and natural selection. And if that's the case, why should unequal be treated equally? You see, evolution rewards survival, not fairness. It does not promote justice or equality. It explains how we came to be, but not how we ought to live. If this is all there is, then rights don't really exist. Nature doesn't recognize them. Historian Yuval Noah Harari puts it this way. What are the human rights? Human rights are not biological reality about Homo sapiens. Take a human being, cut him open and look inside, and you'll find the heart, the kidneys, neurons, hormones, DNA. But you won't find any rights. The only place you find rights is in the stories that we have invented and spread. And if that's true, then the human rights are not objective realities, but human ideas. And what we invent, we can also take away. And so the question becomes, which story, if any, gives us the foundation for human rights? Historian Tom Holland writes that concepts like equality, dignity, and universal human rights were absent in the ancient world. The Greek gave us philosophy, science, and the Olympic Games, but not the idea that all people are equal. Think of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the three greatest philosophers. Despite their brilliance, they accepted a world where some humans were considered living tools or machines. In his famous work, The Republic, Plato even suggested that weak or disabled infants should be eliminated to preserve the strength of society. And when we turn to Rome, the picture is similar. Unwanted children, especially girls, were often abandoned to die. Some were rescued only to be sold into slavery. For the first 7 days of life, infants were not even considered fully human. Archaeological evidence reveals places where dozens of infants' remains were found, discarded, as if their lives had no value. Human life was cheap. Historian Suetonius recounts that Emperor Caligula, when short on food, for wild animals that were used for an entertainment, or their prisoners to be fed to them, chosen at random, without trial, so that an entertainment could go on. Slavery was not only common, but brutal. In one case, when a Roman senator was killed, 400 slaves, men, women, and children, were crucified. Their bodies were taken down and thrown aside, left unburied and exposed to be torn apart by birds and scavenging animals. This was the moral world of antiquity, a world where life could be discarded, a world where mercy was seen as weakness, a world where power determined value. Then something changed. A small group called the Way began to proclaim a radical idea that every human being, slave or emperor, man or woman, was made in the image of God. In the ancient world, the divine was always associated with power, with kings and rulers. But Christianity declares something radically different, that every human being is made in the image of God, that before God all people are equal, that God himself became human, not as a ruler, but as a servant, and that love, not power, is the greatest force in the universe. And around the middle of the first century, a letter began to circulate that would challenge the entire moral structure of the ancient world. And as Tom Holland, not himself a Christian, points out, that a single sentence from that letter helped turn ancient morality upside down. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. This was a massive shift for the time and laid a new foundation for Western moral thinking. It broke down barriers of religion, status, gender, and nationality, and declared that all belong to one human family before God. Christians didn't just believe this, they lived it. When others abandoned infants, they rescued them. When plague spread and people fled, they stayed and cared for the sick, often at the cost of their own lives. When slaves joined their communities, they were called brothers and sisters, and they raised money to buy slaves their freedom. They built communities where the poor, the weak, and the unwanted were not discarded, but cared for. They built hospitals, orphanages, leper houses, and homes for the poor, places where the sick were treated not as burdens, but as persons with dignity. Now, to be fair, compassion did exist in the ancient world, but it was usually limited to one's family, tribe, or social group. Historian Bart Ehrman notes, care for strangers was not a moral expectation. Also, Romans did have a form of medical care, but not for everyone. They were reserved for the privileged, rich, and powerful, for Roman soldiers, and even for the slaves, but only when those slaves were considered useful to the state. Now, what made Christian care new was that it was offered to all, especially the weak, the poor, the unwanted, the outsider. Christian care was rooted in a single idea, that every human being has inherent worth because they are made in the image of God and loved by Him. Now, some might say, isn't this just another story? Maybe a better story, a more noble story, but still a story. So is the Christian story just another story? You see, the difference is this. Christianity makes a historical claim about something that actually happened, that God entered history, was crucified, and rose again. And since there is good reason to believe this is true, grounded in the testimony of those closest to the events, many of whom were willing to suffer, even die, human dignity is not something we invented, but something rooted in reality, something we discover, not decide. And so, where do human rights come from? Are they just ideas created or something deeper? Because if they are just ideas, they can be taken away. And history shows they have been. Entire societies have decided that some lives matter more than others. When human worth is detached from anything higher, it becomes negotiable. But here is the uncomfortable question. Do Christians today still believe what the early Christians believed? Now, to be clear, Christians have not always lived up to this. The Crusades, religious wars, and even the defense of slavery show how people acting in the name of Christ have sometimes done the very opposite of what he taught. But that's not an indictment of Jesus. It's an indictment of how far his followers have drifted from him. Because in many ways we are drifting back toward the ancient world. We divide people into us and them. We value people based on usefulness, identity, or power. We defend our tribe, our politics, our nation above everything else. And in doing so, we risk creating a different kind of Jesus. A Jesus shaped less by the Gospels and more by the values of power, dominance, and exclusion. A Jesus who looks far more like Caesar than like Christ. But that is not the Jesus who changed the world. The real Jesus identified with the weak. He welcomed the outsider. He touched the untouchable. And he said, whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. He did not divide humanity into worthy and unworthy. He gave dignity to all. And so the question is no longer just historical, it's personal. Which vision of humanity will I live by? The ancient one where power determines value, or the Christian one where every human life is sacred? Because in the end, human rights and human dignity will only last if we follow the Jesus who changed the first century world, not the one we have created in our own image.